Hi, welcome back. The verdict from CAS on Manchester City's appeal against a 2-year European ban imposed by UEFA is imminent. And Kaveh Solokol joins me now. You've been across this story for us.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for...
refreshing your notifications.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the email to come from CAS. Normally, they're pretty good at sending them on time, so it should be with us any second now. But as we've been saying this morning, this is so crucial for Manchester City, the future of the club. A lot of people saying that arguably this is the most important result of the season for them, because it means so much to the big clubs in Europe now to be playing in the Champions League, and it would be a massive blow for them if they were to miss out. Now, if they were to miss out, you would have to ask questions about the future of Pep Guardiola. Of course, he has said that he's going to stay and be the manager next season, whatever happens. But of course, his contract is up next summer. So would he sign a new extended contract at a club who are not in the Champions League? There'd be question marks about that. Also question marks about the future of some of the big name players at that club. For instance, Sergio Aguero, Kevin De Bruyne. Would they want to stay at a club who are not playing in the Champions League? Because a lot of these players, you know, they're getting on a bit, without being rude to them, and they want to win the biggest trophies. But let's not forget, they're still in the Champions League this season. Whatever happens today, it is not going to affect that. They will remain in the Champions League. Of course, they hold a 2-1 lead against Real Madrid at the moment. And also, let's not forget the financial impact of this decision, because if they do miss out on the Champions League for 2 seasons, it will probably cost them about £100 million a season. What's
happened in previous cases that have been similar to this one? To give us a steer.
Well, financial fair play is so complicated and controversial that a few of these cases have gone to CAS in the past. So we can try and maybe learn some lessons from what's happened in the past. I think the biggest winners, and what people were really surprised by, is when PSG won a significant victory against CAS. Basically, what happened is that UEFA had cleared them of breaking financial fair play rules, but then a few months later UEFA wanted to reopen the investigation. PSG went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport agreed with PSG, saying that they could not reopen the investigation. So that was PSG being cleared. But then again, we've had other cases where clubs like Galatasaray, for instance, went to CAS and lost their case. They were banned from Europe for a season, and they had to serve that ban. So mixed picture of what's happened in the past. But as far as Manchester City are concerned, Pep Guardiola is saying that he was confident that they would be cleared this morning.
OK, I think you might want to check your email, because you should have an email from CAS saying that the ban has been lifted.
Well, if we're just waiting for that to come through at the moment, Manchester City UEFA decision, it would be an absolutely stunning victory for Manchester City. I have it here in front of me at the moment, actually, and it says the Court of Arbitration has issued its decision in the procedure between Manchester City and UEFA. The case concerned an appeal filed by Manchester City against the decision of UEFA's club financial control body, in which it was deemed to have contravened UEFA's financial fair play rules, and it was banned for 2 seasons and fined €30 million. The panel of arbitrators says who they were. Following the hearing, they concluded the decision issued on February the 14th by UEFA should be set aside and replaced by the following. So the 2-year ban has been set aside. What they say now is that Manchester City have contravened Article 56 of the club licensing and financial fair play rules. Manchester City should pay a fine of €10 million to UEFA within 30 days as from the date of the issuance of the arbitral award. So Court of Arbitration for Sport there has decided that Manchester City have been cleared to play in the Champions League, and instead of being banned for 2 seasons from playing in the Champions League and fined £27 million, they have said that they will just be fined 10 million euros. Now, I think that is about £9 million. So if you're a Manchester City supporter, fantastic news for you. If you're Pep Guardiola, fantastic news for you. If you're a Manchester City player, fantastic news. Pep Guardiola always said that he was confident that they would win this case. They haven't quite won it because they're still being fined £9 million. But CAS basically saying that it was too harsh. The punishment was disproportionate. They should not have been banned from the Champions League for 2 seasons, and that has been overturned.
Yeah, and we can get a statement now actually from Manchester City, and this is what the statement says. Whilst Manchester City and its legal advisors are yet to review the full ruling by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, as we've been referring to it, the club welcomes the implications of today's ruling as a validation of the club's position and the body of evidence that it was able to present. The club wishes to thank the panel members for their diligence and the due process that they administered. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, we have to look at these whole financial fair play rules as well, because this is such a stunning victory for Manchester City. Now, these rules are very, very controversial. They were brought in 2009. As far as UEFA are concerned, they think these financial fair play rules have worked. They point to figures, for instance, saying that in 2011, for instance, clubs in Europe lost combined £1.6 billion. 6 years later, UEFA say because of financial fair play being introduced, those same clubs made a profit of £500 million. So as far as UEFA are concerned, these rules are here to stay. But if you look at this victory, stunning victory by Manchester City, it means that there have to be question marks about the future of financial fair play. Is it more trouble than it's worth? Because we're seeing so many of these cases being dragged out and going to the Court of Arbitration for Sport that you have to say, is it time for UEFA to go back to the drawing board and look at these rules again? One other point to make as well is, let's not forget that the Premier League are also investigating whether Manchester City have broken their own financial fair play rules, and that investigation is ongoing as well. So that is something to look to in the future as well. OK,
Kaveh, thanks ever so much for that update. So the big breaking news is that Manchester City's 2-season European ban has been lifted by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. We can get more on this now. Sports lawyer Daniel G joins us live from North London. Daniel, great to have you with us this morning. What's your reaction to the news?
Well, it's obviously a huge victory for Manchester City. I think if Manchester City executives and fans would have, you'd have asked them yesterday saying, would you have accepted a fine but be allowed to play in a Champions League competition, I think the overwhelming majority would have accepted that. So with only seeing the press release, as you all have seen only in the last few minutes, it appears that they've been exonerated on all of the substantive UEFA FFP breaches, but that they've still imposed a fine, CAS, for the duty to cooperate. So on the main substantive points, and we'll talk about that in due course, if one of the main points was Manchester City suggesting that they had irrefutable evidence effectively going against what UEFA's original decisions had been, they've been vilified in that approach.
Daniel, can UEFA take this further?
Yes, so there is grounds now to be able to go to the Swiss Federal Tribunal. It does happen on occasion on sports cases and particular matters involving the Court of Arbitration for Sport, but the grounds to be able to appeal against those decisions are pretty narrow. It's usually based on procedural fairness, jurisdiction, or public policy grounds. Now, it will be for UEFA to consider based on when the written reasons are actually provided, and it said in the press release that that might be coming, that would be published in the next few days. It will then be for UEFA to decide, given the timelines involved, to be able to appeal. But for the time being, at least, this is a very big victory for Manchester City. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, in 2011, European clubs made losses of £1.6 billion. In 2017, it was £500 million profit. UEFA says that this proves it's working, but where does this leave the rules, FFP?
I think there's probably a number of things to consider, but if I just maybe focus on two, and you're exactly right in what you say. If the main UEFA objective was more or less to stem European-wide club losses from the 1.6, 1.7 billion euro mark back in 2011 to actually clubs collectively making profit, that has to be seen as a success for UEFA. Now, if we're talking about specific cases, and this Manchester City case being that example, the UEFA Club Financial Control Body was making a particular objective rationale based on the specific evidence that was in place and in front of them. So what are we talking about now? We're talking about very narrow grounds of breaches, and Manchester City's lawyers on appeal at CAS have put forward very specific arguments as to why they weren't in breach of the regulations, and because of that, the CAS arbitrators have found in favour of Manchester City. I'm not necessarily sure it absolutely puts the cat among the pigeons in terms of the whole FFP regime, but this is obviously a very significant victory for Manchester City based on what they had always said over a particular period of time that UEFA had effectively got it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. They insisted that they had done nothing wrong. What have they done wrong if they just want to invest their own money in the club?
Well, UEFA's original position and continued position from their press release and otherwise was that what had actually happened was that Manchester City's owners had indirectly diverted their own revenues through sponsorship revenues, which had then inflated that commercial revenues by which Manchester City could drive further spending. Now, we don't know the actual decision, we can't see the actual written reasons at the moment, but if we are suggesting that CAS has agreed with Manchester City, then the issue isn't necessarily that owners can or can't invest a particular amount of money. It was just necessarily the way that that was undertaken and the way that the Football Leaks investigation was carried out, where the evidence was then provided for then UEFA to investigate accordingly.
Will this be the end of the Premier League investigation into City now then?
Well, that's a great question. It's not public at the moment about whether and how far along the Premier League investigation has actually gone. Now, what was clear under the Premier League regulations was that there is a regulation which says that if a Premier League club doesn't provide correct information based on UEFA licensing application, then that is a breach of the Premier League regulations itself. Now, it doesn't appear that that has been the case, so they can't necessarily breach that regulation, but we don't know because nothing else, unfortunately, is in the public domain. But this is obviously the first substantive step to Manchester City clearing its name in relation to FFP and then to the Premier League equivalent of the profitability and sustainability regulations.